is that by this summer, what White House aides were telling me was that the First Lady was actually sort of more content with this life than the President was. And that was a great surprise to me, having covered them for this long. And we see many moments of triumph and fulfillment in this
Let me interrupt you there for one moment. Let me stop you there for one moment. So you've covered them, but you really hadn't interviewed them since 2009. So is there something about telling someone's story of their personal relationship of a marriage and sort of framing a presidency through the prism of a marriage that's a little bit unfair if you haven't interviewed the people in the marriage in the White House since 2009?
Well, it's not sort of secrets of the Obama marriage. That's definitely not this book. It's about translating their partnership to the presidential level. And so I'll give you an example of how I reported this. There's a very moving story in the book about the night that Gabrielle Giffords was shot. And the Obamas are having dinner and they're talking about it. So how could I, an outsider, possibly know that story? Well, I sat with Valerie Jarrett, one of their closest advisors and aides, in her West Wing office, and she was at dinner with them that night, and she told me about their reactions. And the book doesn't say, you know, Michelle Obama thought to herself, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I did what journalists always do, which I talked to sources really close to the President and First Lady who were credible and who participated in this book and weren't forced into it, and told me the story. And the other thing, Soledad, is as journalists,
the First Lady has said, but let me stop you there. The First Lady has said, how would you know that these are, you know, that how would you know what's inside her head? And I'll read you a little bit. You're right. You didn't use the word bitter. That's sort of my characterization. But on the front flap, here's the words you did use. You said, Michelle Obama, and even as she charmed the public, she sought to gain an internal influence and to reconcile her natural bluntness and strong opinions with her confining new role. A lot of people read that and they're like, oh, that sounds like an angry black woman who's now in the White House and kind of frustrated and unhappy and a little bit pissed off about being First Lady. Can you understand her unhappiness with that? Those are your words, not mine.
Again, I never used the phrase angry black woman, and one of the things I documented very carefully in the book is that First Ladyhood is a really hard job, and pretty much every woman who's ever had it has struggled with it in some way. If you read the Laura Bush memoir, for example, she talks about feeling very misunderstood as First Lady. She talks about the isolation of living in the residence. You know, the house is practically
isn't that the point? But in a way, isn't that the point that that's her memoir, right? So after she leaves the White House as the First Lady, who's often, people keep their hands off the woman who's not elected to the office but is in the White House job to watch the kids, they write a memoir, and it's her take on her experience within the White House. And I think ultimately that's what, you know.
But Soledad, your argument is that the First Lady shouldn't be covered in a serious way by journalists. I look forward to reading her memoir. But a reported book by an outside fair observer is a totally different project. It's not.
You have not interviewed her, and you haven't interviewed her. I don't even know the First Lady. I interviewed her once, many years ago, 4 years ago. You haven't interviewed her since 2009, and there are many moments in the book where you talk about things that are internal to her relationship with her husband, the President. So I'm just saying, I do think you should cover her as a journalist. I'm just saying, you can understand how someone would feel having their relationship taken apart in a book, deconstructed in a book from someone who hasn't really done an interview with the two parties involved. That's all I'm saying. We're out of time. I appreciate you, though, joining us.
I spent 40 minutes talking to the two parties, but also, this is what biography is.
In 2009,
trying to understand
in 2009.
the relationship.
I hear you. I get it. Right, but trying to understand a marriage between two people, and the last time you talked to them together was in 2009. I think the First Lady has some, again, don't know her personally at all. I think she has some valid complaints about it.
Then why do you think the White House cooperated with this book?
We've gone way long. How about this?
Why do you think
anybody who would like to know.
I have no idea.
I don't have the slightest idea.
They knew exactly what they were getting into.
I would have no idea, but clearly the First Lady did not cooperate with the book. And I'm not an apologist for the First Lady. I do not know her personally.
Then why did she let me talk to all of her top aides?
But she did not give you an interview.
She hasn't given any book interviews.
So ultimately, you didn't interview her. We are out of time. We have covered this ground. I am so grateful for your time, and I believe that anyone who wants to know more should pick up this book. It's called The Obamas.
Back now with Jodi Cantor, the controversial author of The Obamas. I suppose my overview of the book is that I can understand why Michelle Obama would be annoyed, and she clearly is annoyed, and clearly the focus of a lot of the coverage of the book has been about Michelle Obama and her annoyance and the reasons why she may be annoyed. My question to you is prompted by a conversation I had with Rudy Giuliani for the show tonight, in which he says, you know, fair game to go after the president. He expects it. That's the job description, really, is if you're president, everything's open season. Don't go after his wife. Don't go after the First Lady. You must be disappointed as a New York Times journalist that your book is being characterized as a critical attack in many ways on the First Lady, aren't you?
Well, you know, most people who have read the book think it's a pretty flattering portrait of her, and
well, she doesn't.
Well, readers should make up their minds independently, but also historians and journalists have written about First Ladies for years. My inspiration for this book was No Ordinary Time by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and the reason why it's such an unusual presidential book is that it describes Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt in the White House. And even though he is obviously the president and she is obviously not, it really describes them as partners and devotes equal time to Eleanor Roosevelt. And because Michelle Obama is such a groundbreaking First Lady, and also because she does have an influence on her husband's administration, not in the sense of meddling in West Wing affairs, not in the sense of popping up in the Roosevelt room. Her thoughts and beliefs, thoughts and beliefs and actions do affect the rest of us.
Why would they go out of their way, do you think, to discredit you if, as you say, the book is actually an authoritative account of life in the White House and is factually accurate? Why are they doing this?
That is something I think a lot of reporters in Washington don't necessarily understand. I don't know. I mean, I've covered them for years, and they've never responded to anything like this. And, you know, the thing that I really wonder about also is why people seem to think that the image of Michelle Obama in the book is negative. She's portrayed as a strong woman who goes through a growth experience as First Lady, who learns a lot in public life, and by the end of the book is bolstering and supporting her husband. And, you know, also the funny thing about some of the points at which she's frustrated in the book, like after the Scott Brown victory, is that her feelings are very similar to Democrats on the outside. I mean, when Scott Brown won the Massachusetts race, how many Democrats on the outside were saying, how could the White House political team have let this happen? And the key thing about her is that she has a transformative view of her husband as president. She wants him to do great and lofty things. And so when the Scott Brown Massachusetts loss happens, that's also the time when the administration is making some very unpopular health care deals. And there was the Nebraska deal that basically made it look like there was a giveaway to Nebraska in exchange for a vote. And that was also very troubling to Michelle Obama, her aides told me, because she had really high hopes for this presidency. And from what she says, still does. I mean, she's completely all in for 2012.
But you would accept, I guess, as an overview of this, although you claim to have spoken to 33 aides, and I don't dispute that at all, and I've followed your stuff in the New York Times. You've always been, to me, certainly a competent journalist. I'm not questioning your credentials, but clearly they are, and they're upset about this, and upset about the portrayal. They don't recognize the portrayal that you are now putting forward for the book. They're seeing it as a deliberately negative account of particularly the First Lady, in the sense that you portray her as somebody who is frustrated. You know, you repeat the Carla Bruni "My Life is Hell" account, even though everyone...
No, I say that's false. The reason I had to repeat that is that that's the occasion for the Robert Gibbs blow-up, in which, you know, he said he used a curse word against the First Lady in a White House meeting. And so the question about that episode is really about the extent to which the Obama team is still unified and is still getting along, which is a really key question going into the 2012 election. Are
you slightly sad that the book is being spun, for whatever reason, in this very negative way against the First Lady?
I do think you're on to an excellent question, because the political culture is so nasty and negative that I think there is a good question about if you work really hard on an honest portrayal of these people that shows their successes and failures and their strengths and their weaknesses, you are at risk of being attacked for that. But the great thing is the actual book is out and readers can find it and they can see these fascinating and illuminating stories for themselves. And there's really no alternative in a way, Piers, because are we going to stop writing biographies and character portraits of presidents and first ladies? Do we want to live in a world where that doesn't exist?
No, I guess my only point journalistically is that you are relying on other people to tell you how Michelle Obama in particular has been feeling throughout this book. And I'm not sure that's entirely fair to her, particularly if she disputes the speculation about how she's feeling. I mean, you must accept that if that was you, if that was a book about you, and none of it was actually from you, it was all people that work for you who may have a particular view about you through the employer-employee relationship, that actually that could very well skew how you're feeling and thinking about things to suit their own agendas. So, you know, you may well have been misled by aides who, for whatever reason, have an axe to grind with her. And actually, you don't really have any stuff directly from the First Lady to substantiate her feelings other than through other people. I mean, you would accept that, right?
Well, let me tell you about one scene in the book that I find very poignant, and I'll tell you how I reported it. There's a scene in the book where there's a very minor security incident, and it doesn't really amount to anything in the end, but it's a scary moment, and it really shows the isolation of the presidency and first ladyhood and the anxiety that comes with living with security incidents. Michelle Obama is up alone in the residence, and she gets an email saying that there's been a minor security incident, but she doesn't know what that means. And the email is from Valerie Jarrett, and it turns out that Jarrett is in a meeting and Susan Scher is exercising, so nobody emails her back. And Jarrett and Scher told me this story afterwards, and they told me how concerned the First Lady was and how she didn't want to cause a fuss, and she didn't want to cause a stir by expressing too much alarm. And so she finally picked up the phone and called the White House operator and asked for her husband. So both Jarrett and Scher told me that story on the record. And to me, it was a really illuminating and moving reminder of the restrictions of this kind of life and also the anxiety that runs through it. You know, when there was a news story a couple of weeks ago about how a bullet hit the back of the White House, the sort of undertone of the story, the real importance of it is that, you know, the back of the White House is where Malia and Sasha go out and play, right? I mean, there's a swing set out there, and that's where they can go kick and play a soccer ball. And so part of what the book is showing is what it's like to actually live this life. And by the way, I do think that there's a really important question that hangs over this, which is think about all of the difficult things that people have to think about before they run for public office, right? Think about something like a security threat. And that really affects who runs for office in this country, who's willing to go into politics. And so looking at these questions and how the President and First Lady live through them is really important, I think.
If the First Lady's watching this, and I'm sure it's on her nightly viewing schedule, would you express any regret to her in the way that this is all being portrayed?
Oh, well, you know, I can't take responsibility for what people are saying on TV shows when they haven't read the book and they haven't studied this. I guess I can, you know, only express my wishes as an author that people really absorb the book and think about it carefully. But all of my journalism has been about understanding her and documenting her in a fair way.
Well, she clearly thinks you are, but I appreciate you coming on, Jodie. Thank you very much.